Have you ever been playing a game and thought to yourself, man, I wish this were a book, or this game is neat, but I wish the world felt more seamless and less predictable, or man, I wish this game were fun? Whether for a lack of quality development, writing, or understanding on the player's part, many games have a disposition that rubs its constituents in just such a way so as to lead them into a playthrough of frustration, as I like to call it. That is to say, a playthrough wherein the user just bought a game for $30 to $60 and is now forcing themselves to play through it despite having one of the aforementioned thoughts stuck on their shoulder. This is the kind of thing you'd expect to happen commonly to professional game reviewers, who have to finish titles as part of their job, but less so towards casual gamers who use the hobby as a way to wind down at the end of the day. Unfortunately, this is a common phenomenon these days and for both parties, and it isn't difficult to see why. Gaming has become an overwhelming favorite medium of the modern age, so of course people of all types are going to run into similar issues as one another, and consistently across a multitude of titles. I think my playthrough of Cyberpunk 2077 encapsulates this pretty well. Despite having many strengths as a game, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world felt artificial, no pun intended. The combat was arcadey and the dialogue downright cringy at times.
Night City are getting safer every day. We've seen recorded homicides drop from 7,103 a year ago to just...
Hold on. The streets are safe, you say, but what about the highways?
And this feeling stuck with me throughout the entire playthrough, even when they weren't problems in the moment, because I knew that I'd have to interact with those aspects of the game sooner or later once again. In short, I played through the whole game, and the bad experiences weren't self-contained. They leached out into every aspect of the game and marred my enjoyment of it as a whole. So, this principle of frustrated playthroughs leads me to the topic of this video, Morrowind. You see, Morrowind exhibits the frustration playthrough problem, but in reverse. Instead of starting strong in a AAA title with gorgeous aesthetics, tight sound design, and the promise of an expansive role-playing experience as displayed by UI, before slowly showing its true colors in unfortunate fashion, Morrowind starts the modern player out with questionable graphics at best, very old-school sound design which features almost no voice dialogue, and almost zero explanation for the game's mechanics or what the player should expect to be able to do later in the playthrough. While a modern player might give a contemporary game 4 to 5 hours of playtime before giving up on it, Morrowind newbies tend to donate no more than 30 minutes to the game before deciding that it's not for them. And that's a real shame because the game rewards the player for time investment in ways no other game I've ever played is able to do, and do so consistently. This reverse frustration playthrough idea generally gets the better of first-time players more than the players get the better of it. And what's left is an experience that's usually akin to checking out the character creation screen, blazing through most of the dialogue options with an NPC or two, then swinging away at a mud crab with an iron dagger before realizing your attacks aren't hitting, and ultimately the game just isn't for you. I believe this conclusion, in the vast majority of cases, is either a mistake or at least a slight inaccuracy. I know it's a terrible cliche to say about a game at this point, but Morrowind really does have something for almost every kind of gamer, and usually will just use all of its facets to win over players outright. Yes, the combat functions on a dice roll mechanic, yes, there are very few voiced lines of dialogue, and yes, the graphics are one step away from being a two-dimensional stick figure that your nephew drew in his first grade class, but these are all necessary functions to creating the experience of Morrowind, and that's an experience of true exploration, intricate plot lines, and political strife in a unique and varied world, and the garnering of absolute power in a ruthlessly designed map that is simply not leveled to the character in the vast majority of cases. In this review, we're going to be going over most of the aspects of the game using a spoiler-free methodology. Despite this video being a review, my goal is not really to give a verdict on a game that was released in 2002. My main goal, truly, is to talk about this game and its strengths to get as many people as possible motivated enough to play it. I won't be pulling any punches, of course, but the truth is that Morrowind is a masterpiece that would speak for itself if it was given the time of day it deserves in these trying times. If at any point during this video you want to give it a try, I recommend clicking off the video and going to your favorite dealer and picking this thing up for the 15 bucks or whatever the hell it costs. Sometimes it's free, just keep your eyes peeled and let's get started. I'm going to waste no time and get right to the elephant in the room. Dice roll combat. You see, in 2002, Morrowind was developed to resemble a Dungeons & Dragons campaign as laid out in a computer. This means that a lot of what you do will function on a randomized dice roll system that takes a lot of factors into account. Basically, when you swing your weapon, even if you hit your target, the game will only count the hit as successful if you roll it. So, if you're using an iron dagger without short blades as a skill, you might find that your rolls aren't going in your favor almost ever, and you'll simply be striking through your opponent as though, nothing is making contact. This can be a jarring experience for a new player who's used to Oblivion or Skyrim's modern combat system that counts a hit as any swing that makes physical contact with your opponent. And honestly, I'd be lying if I said that the dice roll system in some way makes Morrowind more exciting combat-wise than its successors. But the truth is that the entire game's combat is balanced around the dice rolls, and once you understand how your skill interacts with your hit chance and damage dealt, the occasional miss stops being an eyesore and starts to mesh with the game naturally. All the same, I won't pretend like the melee combat system is something you'll totally be addicted to. It's not why you play Morrowind. The magic system, however, is absolutely banana nut fucking muffins fun as shit, the best there is. Instead of dice rolling physical contact of your spells, Morrowind dice rolls successful casts instead of hits, where some of the factors included in a successful cast are down to the player's level and the school of magic being cast, as well as the magnitude of the spell itself. You see, a player with low-level destruction will have a lower chance of casting a poison touch spell, but a player who does successfully cast it will always make contact with their target, provided they are, indeed, aiming at a target. This can make magic an attractive option for players who like to look at numbers and know exactly how guaranteed their success is in an encounter. Well, that, and because magic in Morrowind is absolutely fucking broken. In cases where you are under-leveled, you can visit one of the many mages around the island of Vardenfell, which is where Morrowind actually takes place, and offer up some coins so they can create a custom spell for you. That's right, a straight-up custom spell where you decide the attributes associated with it. Damage, seconds applied, mana cost, and cast chance, where the latter two values are derived from the former two. Custom spellmaking is something that many people bemoan the exclusion of in Skyrim, and one playthrough of Morrowind will show you just why. The ability to create personalized effects that suit the journey you're undertaking for your level is something that creates a ton of freedom for major hybrid builds. Not only this, but being able to master a school of magic and create an absolutely broken spell with multiple effects as your reward for your efforts is an unmatched feeling of satisfaction. Combined with the fact that the effects themselves are unapologetically made to break the game, there is no greater feeling than finally cracking the code on some spell or mechanic that brings together a plan to make your character a literal god. It may seem like I'm advertising magic a little favored-like in comparison to the melee combat, but remember that whatever applies to magic applies to enchanting. Whatever applies to enchanting applies to your weapons and armor, which includes non-passive effects, so if you're a warrior, don't forget that you can apply insane bonuses to everything you're wearing. Cheers. As for stealth gameplay, it's broken, and not in the good way. In Skyrim, your character remains unseen by avoiding line of sight with other characters and staying quiet. In Morrowind, your character remains stealth by dice rolling every second. I swear to God, that's how it works. You can sneak around provided you're leveled, but when it comes to pickpocketing with your stealthy character, you'll never get it done. The pickpocketing algorithm is also pretty damn broken, and then it rolls checks for success multiple times in a single attempt. One for opening the inventory, one for seeing which items appear to the player, one for taking the item, and one for closing the pickpocketing window. So basically this formula was created in such a way to make pickpocketing anything of value next to fucking impossible, and you won't be able to do it without installing a mod to alter its function in game. I understand that mods can change a lot about Morrowind, but I'm talking about vanilla Morrowind as played through OpenMW here, nothing more. I love stealth gameplay as much as the next Enwa, but in Morrowind it just isn't that great. Archery is okay. Those of you who haven't touched Morrowind but have played either Skyrim or Oblivion will be used to the leveling systems that revolve around a leveled world. A leveled world is simply a world that levels enemies in tandem with the player to, hopefully, provide a smooth challenge curve. So, if you're level 1, enemies will be weaker, and as you get to like level 5, they'll get a little stronger to kind of keep pace with you. Does that make sense? Okay. The problem in Oblivion was that the level curve was far too punishing if you deviated from your build even a little. And the problem with Skyrim was that you essentially needed to partake in all the crafting skills to keep pace with the leveled world, which meant that you were limited on the combat styles allotted to the player, despite the game being advertised as a total build freedom kind of game. Ironically, Morrowind, which is thought of as the more hardcore old school game, matches this description far better than Skyrim because its world, in 95% of cases, doesn't take the character's level into any account for the content to be found in it. In Morrowind or Skyrim, an enemy you find at level 1 will get stronger as you get stronger, basically. There are level lists for Skyrim, wherein if you're level 30 and a bandit gets to level 15, he might cap out at level 15, but in Oblivion, they just went on infinitely, and if you weren't leveling efficiently, well, you'd fall behind, which made leveling a problem. In Morrowind, an enemy you find at level 1 will be the same exact way as you find him at level 100. The only difference with Morrowind is that the world will sometimes increase chances to find different kinds of enemies throughout the world. So, a level 100 player will generally find the same things that a level 1 player will, but just will have a greater chance of finding stronger enemies. So it's not exactly the same, but at least those enemies that you do find don't get infinitely stronger with you. You can overcome them eventually. This means that a level 20 player moving along a path can expect to find these same enemies and items as a level 1 character. And that's correct, I did say items as well as enemies. You see, the loot in Morrowind is all unique and doesn't become weaker or stronger depending on the character who finds it. This means that an exceptionally open-eyed wanderer who takes his or her time to search every root and crevice of the world around them will have an incredible time in Morrowind, where the player who burns through the world trying to find their fast travel options will miss a whole host of content that could have aided or otherwise altered their gameplay in big ways and for the better. This has the effect of making loot always worth checking out, even if you don't plan on picking up anything mundane, because leveling won't oust the viability of an item. Take, for instance, the reward in Skyrim's A New Hand Touches the Beacon quest. That reward, the sword, is leveled to the character, which means once you get some smithing levels, once you get some enchanting levels, and once you just level up generally, that super cool sword is now worthless aside from aesthetics in your home. Hell, you don't even need to level a crafting skill. Just level your character and then grab some randomized loot from a common bandit, and it will outclass the literal Dawnbreaker. This makes leveling in Skyrim and Oblivion a tedious balance of trying to stay at least on par with the curve, where in Morrowind it's a game of trying to meet the curve and then blazing beyond it at exponential speeds as you become one of the most powerful beings to ever exist. In Morrowind, if you get an item as a quest reward or a drop of an enemy, that item was either super broken or super weak from level 1. Congratulations to those Outlanders who managed to find one of the many game-breaking items laid out along their travels of Vvardenfell. There's another side to this coin though, and it wouldn't be fair to give Morrowind all this praise without mentioning it. Role-playing. Indeed. In Skyrim and Oblivion, you have ample reason to stick to the design you give your character from level 1. The more limited your skill choice in these two games, the more powerful you will be relative to the leveled world, since you'll have higher levels in specific skills, but lower character levels overall for the game to work off of. In short, Morrowind doesn't really provide any motivation for the player character to properly roleplay, since there's next to no punishment for leveling random skills however you like. In Morrowind, a sneaky archer who decides to become a bombastic destruction mage halfway through its playthrough won't be underleveled compared to the rest of the world. It'll simply be a half-decent sneaky archer and mage until one of the two pushes itself into broken territory. In Skyrim, on the other hand, a character who does this will absolutely be a terribly weak archer and a terribly weak mage, likely for the rest of their playthrough, unless they decide to lower the difficulty to the point where the challenge is next to non-existent. And that's fine if that's that's how you like to play, by the way. I'm just saying that in Morrowind, people with a nuanced understanding of the leveled worlds and people who like leveled worlds will find that they might not have any real motivation to delve deep into their character's role, right? Just food for thought, make of it what you will. In my opinion, Morrowind has the coolest locale of any Elder Scrolls game. The island of Vvardenfell is ripe with visual storytelling, unique aesthetic, and the design philosophy of doing more with less. The world is actually quite small once you understand it, but goddamn does it feel huge. Your character is slow at first, and there are enemies everywhere that can one-shot you right from the get-go. There's this ominous fog limiting your vision beyond a certain distance, and when there isn't fog, there's ash storms just everywhere, can't see anything. Seriously, the world does a great job of giving the player a sense of intense insignificance in an otherwise small world by Bethesda standards. The tree-like mushrooms and habitat that make up the majority of the eye candy aren't just there for show either. Players who do a bit of reading and are curious enough to meet with the particularly strange communities in Morrowind will find that the animal life serves an actual purpose to the economy and overall well-being to specific peoples, on top of the mushrooms functioning as structures to one of the great houses. That's only on one half of the map as well. The other half is made up of a more desolate wasteland featuring foyadas that line the terrain with lava, the aforementioned ash storms that make travel difficult, and the communities that reflect the environments they live in, with their lifestyle, but also their dialogue, disposition towards your race, and architecture. I mentioned earlier that this game's world does a lot with very little, and that's true partly for one big reason: the lack of fast travel. You see, Morrowind's fast travel system exists in a way that's integrated with the game itself instead of being an external function accessed by opening up the map or some other UI. These things are called Siltstriders, and the inhabitants of Vvardenfell use them to travel to and fro major cities. You can pay to use them like taxis, but of course you need to be near one before getting in it. So, if you were at a more isolated area, you had better done some research or written down some directions to get back to a Siltstrider, or you're going to need to find a local to point you in the right direction. These things are called boats, and the inhabitants of Vvardenfell use them to travel to and fro major cities, mostly. You can pay to use them like taxis, but just like Siltstriders, it's good to write down some directions to get back to them if you plan on doing some exploring. Not only are these methods of transportation convenient, but they're also extremely powerful if you know what you're doing. Taking the time to understand the Siltstrider and boat routes can be a reward in and of itself while playing Morrowind. And that's not something that could be said for Skyrim's horse carriage system, which simply acted as a way to unlock all the fast travels needed for a playthrough. Aside from the more common forms of travel, Morrowind bakes fast travel right into its magic system. If you want to fast travel somewhere, feel free to teleport right to it. If you want to be a Chad who optimizes their gameplay and burns through quests, feel free to put a mark spell down at the quest giver, and then cast recall when finishing up some chore or another. This is why I like to say that Skyrim is to RS3, where Morrowind is to OSRS. You know how in RS3, once you visited a major city, you could just unlock a permanent free teleport to that area for the rest of your account's lifespan? Where in old school RuneScape, you had to earn the right to teleport to places with your magic skill? Well, that's similar to how Morrowind functions in relation to Skyrim. In Skyrim, you'll find scrolls and think to yourself, man, this is good a weight to gold ratio, I think I'll sell it. In Morrowind, you'll find scrolls and think to yourself, man, this thing is going to let me teleport out of this dungeon once I'm finished, that's super convenient. And yes, because magic is actually useful beyond DPS in Morrowind, that means scrolls actually have a use to warriors and rogues as well, since they can provide utility in ways other than kill XYZ enemy fast, please. Although they can do that as well. Basically, Morrowind has a fast travel system that's baked into its gameplay as opposed to just being this extra thing kind of cooked on top of the UI to make it convenient for you to play. Still convenient, but you gotta do the work yourself to get there. It just makes it more rewarding once you do. In summary, the world is sick to look at, feels big while being relatively small, is built from the ground up to reward exploration, and gives the player who has their eyes open and studies the game the tools needed to traverse it efficiently. It's arguable that Vardenfell itself is one of Morrowind's biggest achievements as a game. At this point in the video, I'm going to implore anyone who plans on playing this game who hasn't already to stop watching the video and get to it, because the rest of this video, while not giving away any spoilers whatsoever, is going to be delving a bit into the cultural specifics of Vardenfell and Morrowind as a game. If you don't mind that, we'll be moving on now by talking about the factions and their functions both as storytelling devices, but also as motivational tools for roleplaying. Just like in Skyrim, the Fighters Guild operates as a place for melee users to get their fill of questing and the like. Unlike in Skyrim, the Fighters Guild isn't isolated to a single place on the map, and doesn't have any out-of-place werewolf business attached to it. And it actually has some interesting interplay with other guilds in the game, if you're paying attention. The Thieves Guild is a guild for thieves, and problematically has a pickpocket quest attached to it early on. As aforementioned, the pickpocket skill is banana nut busted, and the likelihood you'll be able to pick the pocket of the guy you need to without reloading, even while moderately leveled, is next to zero. So you'll likely have to use clever methods of getting what you want from people in such quests. Aside from that, the guild operates in the shadows and doesn't really care how you manage to accomplish your tasks, save for the fact that you shouldn't be killing anyone while getting it done. On top of this, the Thieves Guild is in direct conflict with the Kamana Tong, the crime syndicate native to Morrowind. The Kamana Tong operate as a realistic mirror to how the Thieves Guild operates, but with looser moral ethics. It makes complete sense that prior to the Empire settling on Morrowind, there would be some function of organized crime, and the Kamana Tong operate in-game as an unjoinable lore foundation for the sake of believability, but also as a key player in direct conflict with the Thieves Guild. Morrowind has a way of making sure that factions and houses don't operate just within their own lane, but rather cross paths with other key players in the game, as you might expect to happen in a world filled with political turmoil. This has the effect of capturing a player's intrigue with the world around them, and instead of re-rolling a new character, might opt to read an in-game book about the culture of a certain guild or house, or might even try to see if they can join it along with their other guild. This is in stark contrast to Skyrim's methodology of keeping each guild a storyline that's completely detached from the realities of the world around them. Where one quest in Morrowind might see a player murder an NPC for X, Y, or Z reasons, another quest might have you work that same NPC to accomplish a different goal, and however you approach the game decides how the world around you shapes up. It isn't an overwhelming difference all the time, mind you. Sometimes all that happens when you rise to the top rank of some faction or another in Morrowind is that people will occasionally refer to your character with the proper title, but other times, the influence one choice makes on the rest of the world is unseen, but massive in outcome. The remaining guilds include the Mages Guild, which is a group that you'd think revolves around magic, but nope, actually it revolves around people-pleasing for the sake of earning brownie points with the higher-ups. The Imperial Legion, the Imperial Cult, the Tribunal Temple, and the East Empire Company. What you'll come to find about the guilds is that they often have the foreign versions of themselves and native versions of themselves in some form. The Thieves Guild is the foreign mirror to the Kamana Tong, for example. And the Imperial Cult serves as an imperial mirror to the Temple, which incorporates traditional Dunmer religion into its practices. This often provides the player with role-playing opportunities beyond just, I am melee, therefore Fighters Guild, since cultural associations between the player and the world can make a bigger difference between choosing one guild or another compared to simple stat preferences. Or in Skyrim's case, autopiloting from one isolated plotline to the next until you 100% the game. And then there's the Great Houses. The Great Houses are extensions of distinct native civilizations that could be found throughout Morrowind in the past, and each serves a distinct function in the era that Morrowind takes place in. Of the 5 houses recognized by the Empire, 3 can be found and joined on Vardenfell: House Hlaalu, Telvanni, and Redoran. Much like the guilds, which house you join will be predicated mostly on the stat preferences and cultural tastes of your character. Unlike the guilds, once you join a house, you won't be able to join a different one. You're locked into that servitude for life. Hlaalu acts as the diplomatic house of the 3, and will serve imperial sympathizers and persuasive mercantilers the best. Telvanni is the house of the mages. Telvanni are known for being ultra-powerful and intelligent, but also extremely fucking mean and stuck up. Even among their own ranks, the Telvanni are never short of disdain for people who are even slightly different than themselves. Redoran is the house of the fighters, and they act as a sort of protectorate for traditional Dunmer values, including values in combat. The Redoran members are headstrong and quick to use violence to solve their problems, but they also exhibit great respect for other factions that value warrior culture, including those aligned with the Imperials, although they aren't fans of the Imperials generally speaking. What's interesting about the house versus guild dynamic is that some players will say that one of the first things they do upon starting a new game is join a house, while others say that houses are best left as one of the last journeys a character goes on. And then others yet will maintain that the main quest is obviously the first thing they should be completing. Furthermore, there are some veterans who say you can complete the main quest by not doing it, and what do I mean by that? Well, you'll have to find out for yourself, I ain't ruining it for you. Suffice it to say that Morrowind does not make the correct path a very obvious one. As a matter of fact, there probably isn't a correct path. All of the game's content is worth doing, whether last or first. This is in stark contrast to the general vibe that Skyrim gives you, which is to either pursue the main quest in an effort to gain all the associate shouts and wealth that comes with killing dragon after dragon, or ignore the quest entirely and begin knocking out the guilds one by one. This point leads me into the motivational mechanics to maintain Morrowind's role-playing gameplay. Basically, these mechanics function to keep a player motivated, to stick to their character's role, instead of branching out into every facet of the game in a single playthrough. For Morrowind, those mechanics lie in the guilds and houses. Because the world isn't leveled to you, there is little reason to fear over-leveling without gaining much power and most of your used skills, because you'll never become weaker due to useless skills being over-leveled. Because of this, Bethesda opted to bake the motivational mechanics right into the political powers that be in Morrowind instead of the world. That is to say that the skill requirements of houses and guilds serve as your motivation to roleplay, aside from your own internal motivation, of course. I wrote an article on my website that goes into the roleplay motivational mechanics in more depth. Feel free to look at that, link is in the description. But to get the gist of it, imagine a new player playing Morrowind. They choose to be a melee-based warrior, and so they join the Fighters Guild, naturally. After learning about the Fighters Guild skill requirements, they'll opt to train those stats and skills that move them up the ranks quickest, and thus the game has provided motivation to roleplay, to play the role of a fighter. This is a brilliant design that you just won't find in a game like Skyrim, which not only has almost no requirements to join a guild, but doesn't have any requirements to advance in one beyond doing their associated quests. Instead, Skyrim opts to have the motivation baked into the world leveling, which can catch a new player by surprise after leveling too many unused skills, leaving them far weaker at higher levels than they were at lower levels. Morrowind has its fair share of problems, but I don't believe you can say that the houses or guilds are among them. The factions in this game, to summarize, are brilliant. The story in Morrowind, by which I mean the main quest's story, is probably the strongest of any Bethesda game, and certainly the strongest among the Elder Scrolls games. Again, this review is spoiler-free, so I'll be walking on eggshells here, but the philosophy behind Morrowind's main quest revolves around the nature of truth, about prophecy, and whether or not we as humans are fixed on our routes in life, or if we can tweak the mechanics of the universe and alter the course of history. The game itself hardly mentions this to you, but when you're paying attention, and if you're reading an awful lot, you'll find that these principles crop up now and then, and right from the start. What one finds immoral or unsavory on the island of Vardenfell, another might find entirely justified or even beautiful. Two players who do the same quests as one another in the same order will have entirely different interpretations about what has transpired in front of them if one of those players takes extra time to read miscellaneous dialogue or books from a local bookstore regarding the topics at hand. This is Morrowind's greatest strength as a game: the story. The gameplay can be satisfying, the world is unique, yes, the exploration can be rewarding, but the story is a masterpiece of high art, and is brilliantly layered into the world, so that a player who 100%s the game might completely miss it if they aren't taking their time to envelop the lore into their minds. The tale of Morrowind that unfolds before the player is one of the greatest showcases there is of how the video game medium can be a vehicle for incredible story crafting, and how you can give a player all the keys they need to access it while still keeping it beyond the easy-to-grasp predictions of the player. When it feels like the world of Morrowind is silly, foolish, or otherwise too dull, the story will pull the player into an adventure that covers the whole of Vardenfell and the whole of its cultures, both past and present, and maybe even future. And when the game seems to be coming to a conclusion or a standstill, the game thrusts the player back into the real world and foolishness of the meandering and bootlicking needed to grease the gears of a political movement. The story in Morrowind just feels whole. Even though you're pretty sure you didn't understand it on your first playthrough, and you're unlikely to get all the details on your second, it just feels right. And it isn't marred by silly NPC scripting that makes the AI talk like, AI. There's not much more I can say about this without ruining it for you, so I'll leave it at that. The story is the best part about Morrowind, and that's saying a lot because there's already a lot to love. The gameplay, although dated, feels tightly made and responsive, the world is unique, the exploration is beyond rewarding, factions are numerous, and function as strong roleplay motivators, the houses are powerful world-building tools that offer many benefits for joining, the dialogue, thanks to the fact that it isn't normally bound to voice actors, is expansive and rich, and all these aspects of Morrowind aren't strong in a vacuum, they are designed from the ground up to complement one another and act as power multipliers upon their own strengths. Morrowind is Bethesda's best. Now go play it. Good luck, have fun.